Hey, welcome to Church Experience Online. We're so happy you joined us today. As you watch this teaching video, if you have any questions or need help getting connected, please don't hesitate to reach out by phone or email. Also, our website is the best place to go if you would like to access helpful Growth Steps resources, join a serving team, connect in a life group, get your questions answered, or support this movement financially by giving online. At the end of this teaching video, you'll hear one of our Church Experience original worship songs, and we hope that gives you an opportunity to worship and reflect on what you learned. Thanks again for joining us at Church Experience Online.
I think most people do the same things over and over again, and they do the same things that other people do, and then they end up getting the same results in their own unique way, but they get the same results of the rest of the world. What if I told you that there was a secret to living life differently, to thinking differently, that most people did not know? And that if you were to take that secret and apply it to your life, you would get vastly different, more fulfilling, more joy-filled results than everybody else. Well, there is actually that secret. In fact, it was given to us in the form of a roadmap for life, and it was given to us by the least guy that you would ever expect to deliver the secret. In fact, this guy used to hate Christians. His name was Paul. He would persecute them. He would drag them off to jail. He could not stand them. But then Jesus changed his life so much, inspired him to write down all that God had done in his life, and he became this incredible church planner and leader in God's kingdom. And this guy, Paul, wrote a letter that contains what some have called the open secret to joy. And he wrote it to a church. In fact, the first church of all of Europe, a church in the city of Philippi. And this book is called Philippians. It's in the Bible. And this book, this letter is truly a secret. It's a gift to us that helps us understand how to live life in a way that gets different results than what most people get. But you have to change your thinking. It's a radical shift, a radical departure in thinking from the way that most people in our world think. But it gets much better results. So the summary of chapter 2, we're looking at a different chapter of each week of these 4 weeks in November, the 4 chapters of Philippians. We're looking at chapter 2 today, and the summary of chapter 2 would I think, be this, is that when we adjust our thinking from thinking inward, me, and forward, what's next for me, to outward and upward, to thinking of others and thinking of God, what does our Father want us to do? It radically changes our lives. That subtle change causes us to experience life in a very different way. You know, sometimes we can miss the things that are right in front of us. Jennifer took my 2 daughters up to a funeral with her grandmother, who was 97 years old and passed away earlier this year, and they went to North Carolina, and me and the boys stayed home. They were at a hotel and unloading, and she didn't have any of our help in unloading since it was just her and the 2 young daughters, and so she grabbed the girls in her arms and as many of the bags as she could, and they were making their way into the hotel. She couldn't take everything, and so she had a small bag of trash, a little fast food bag, and had some food and some trash in it that they had accumulated along their road trip up to the Carolinas, and she took it and she set it next to the car, next to the wheel, thinking, I'll just get that in the morning and I'll throw it away. So they went to the hotel, they slept, it's been a long road trip, they came out the next morning to continue on. She grabbed this bag of stuff and she went in the car and thought, well, I'll clean out some of the other road trip accumulated trash, put it in the bag, and then I'll just throw it all out together. And so she kind of set it in Macy's lap, my 4-year-old, and she started grabbing other trash around the car to put it in this bag. And as she was doing that and reaching for the stuff, she looked down on Macy's legs, and she said there was 200 ants all over her legs that just had come out of this bag. And she didn't realize it, but during the night, these ants had come for this food, and then now we're on Macy's legs, and so she panicked, of course, and got her daughter out of the car, and she brushed our daughter off, and it was this crazy experience. At the beginning, she didn't even notice what was happening. Like it was right there next to her, but because she was doing something and helping. And there's sometimes we can miss what's right in front of us. We're missing it and we don't even know we're missing it. In fact, that's the scariest thing in life, to think about what you're missing that you don't realize that's maybe causing damage or that could cause harm, or the things in your life that are eroding your relationships, that are killing your joy, that's stealing your peace, and you don't even know it. You don't even see it. And I think a lot of it comes from a shift in how we think about life. And one of the things I like about this letter that was given to us by this guy, Paul, who, inspired by God, had his total life transformed. He writes to us as the church, and he says that we must shift our thinking. To be like Jesus, to live like Jesus lived, we have to shift our thinking. Philippians chapter 2, verse 3, he says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others." And then he goes on and he says, "In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. So think like Jesus thought." When I was a new pastor, when I was in my 20s, I would get around great leaders, pastors who had a lot more experience than me, and I would ask them what they did. I'd say, "So tell me about your schedule. Tell me about how you prepare and write messages. Tell me how you counsel or coach people. Tell me how you do these things." And I wanted to know what they did. As I got a little older, and I still have a lot to learn, but as I got a little older and I crossed into my 30s, I stopped asking them, for the most part, what they did, and I tried to understand how they thought. When I got around someone who had more experience than me, or was further down the road than me in life, that had more experience parenting, or been married longer than me, or whatever, I wanted to know how they thought about things. Because if you understand how someone does something, that helps you in that specific scenario. But if you understand how someone thinks, in this case, how a leader thinks, that helps you in every scenario. I want to know how Jesus thinks. And it says here that Jesus thinks differently than most of us think. Jesus, it says that in our relationships with one another, we should have the same mindset as Jesus had. So he had a different mindset. He had a certain way that he approached relationships. How did Jesus think about things? Verse 6, this is how he thought. It gives us a little glimpse into it. He says, "Who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing, by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross." So Jesus, who is the king above all kings, who sat on a glorious throne, all-powerful God, Jesus, the name above every name, he humbled himself. Instead of using that to his own advantage, he disadvantaged himself for your advantage. That's powerful. That's how a servant leader thinks. That's how someone who is out to make a difference with their life thinks. He was willing to put himself at a disadvantage for your advantage. When's the last time that you disadvantaged yourself for the advancement of another person? See, our world is all about thinking inward, me, and forward. What's next for me? How can I get better, bigger, move on, do this or that? And how can I advance my own cause? But Jesus radically shifted that paradigm, and he didn't think about himself. He thought outward about others, and he thought upward. What does the Father want? What pleases the Father? What if you and I were to shift our thinking? In your notes, here's a lesson, and I think this is a vision for what could be for us as followers of Jesus. It says we humbly care about the interests of others. The interests of others, as it says there in Philippians 2, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. That was Christ's mindset, to think of others. And Christians, we look outward. We don't just look inward, we look outward. And this is what it means to be great. If you want to define greatness from Jesus' perspective, this is what it meant to be great. You want to live a great life? It's not defined by the things that the world will try to define and categorize as great. It's different. Matthew chapter 23, verse 11, in one statement, Jesus says, the greatest among you will be your servant. And that one statement, the greatest among you will be your servant, Jesus defined greatness. He set a new bar, the higher bar for what it means to be great. It wasn't just to be successful. It wasn't to get a lot or to have a lot or to do a lot. It was to serve a lot. It was to influence and impact a lot. It was ultimately to serve others. Shifted mindset. But look what happened in Jesus' life. He literally changed the world. There's been no name spoken more on planet Earth than the name of Jesus. There's been no name written about more than Jesus. I mean, there's been no person who's ever walked this planet that's had a greater impact than the person who lived this out more than anybody else. So if you want to get different results with your life than most people get, you have to change your thinking. You have to change your approach. And Jesus says to be great, you serve others. You don't live inward, you live outward. You don't live forward, it's just about what's next for me. You live upward. God, what pleases you? And in doing that, it's amazing the impact. We look for the interests of others. This is really the secret sauce for what makes a great relationship. You're like, man, my marriage is okay. My friendships are all right. My work relationships are decent. Like, you want them to be incredible? This is the secret sauce. You serve. You stop thinking about me. How can I listen? How can I serve? How can I help? This is the most natural thing in the world for us to miss. Like we by default, we think of ourselves. By default, we think of me. What's in it for me? What do I want to say? What do I want to do? If you don't believe me, check this out.
Palm Springs is just so beautiful. I mean, it's hot, but it's like a dry heat. And anyway, we spent most of the weekend just lounging by the pool.
Oh, hanging out by the pool. That reminds me of my belly flop story. Can't just start telling it now, though. I'll just think about it until Siobhan finishes talking.
That reminds me, last summer I was house sitting for my Uncle Danny Elfman.
Oh, Summer! Oh, they're gonna love my Cancun food poisoning story. Why are you still talking? There.
Steven Spielberg himself was there.
Cool, I have a story about Cancun and eating tacos there in the summer.
Tacos! That reminds me of the time I drove a taco truck to California.
So then I woke up in a hospital next to Keith David.
Good, I have a story.
Oh,
You go ahead.
No, you go.
Stop it!
Okay, quit talking. Stop, it's my turn.
Finish now! Be done! Finish now!
Okay, I'm just gonna go. So I had just landed in New York City.
New York! Me story! Me, New York story! Me!
Wait! Me though! Me Choco Taco story! Me!
Well, sorry to interrupt. Did you guys say Emily?
No!
But it was a wrap.
Me, Emily.
Filled it up, and that's how I won the key to the city and the key to my wife's heart.
Going back a few stories, I had a Choco Taco party.
Hey, everybody say me. Come on, say me. It's the most natural posture in your life is to think about me. When you wake up on Monday morning, I mean, what do you think about? Who do you think about? You naturally think about me. Not me, but you, me. Like, that's what you think about. And you think about, like, all right, what's in it for me? What do I want to do? What do I feel like doing? And this is just how we approach life. And Jesus did not approach life that way. It was outward. How can I serve? It was about you. And it was upward. Father, what pleases you? How can I serve you? Why don't I get different results? You got to think different. Philippians chapter 2, down in verse 14, Paul writes, do everything without grumbling or arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a warped and crooked generation. Then you will shine among them like stars in the sky as you hold firmly to the word of life. And then I will be able to boast on the day of Christ that I did not run or labor in vain. You know, he talks about shining like Christ, shining light into the world. And how does that happen? It happens because we live differently. And he says a very powerful statement that is very hard to apply to our lives. He says, do everything without complaining or arguing. Do everything without complaining or arguing. So it's easy not to complain and argue when things are going well, and it's something you want to do when it goes your way. But everything also includes the things you don't want to do. It includes the days when you don't feel like it. It includes the moments where it's not going your way, when they say something you don't like. And it's like those times are included within everything. And to be challenged and commanded really ultimately by God to do everything without complaining or arguing is a very counterculture way to live. And he says, you're in this warped and crooked generation, and in our generation, to think of it being warped is very, very relevant because it's true. This is really a good description of the world that we're living in, is it's not what it could be. It's like whatever it was, it's been degraded, and there's all kinds of conflict and arguments and tension and frustration and all this pent-up resistance and all that stuff between people. And there's all this debating and arguing and who's right and who's wrong and who's better and who's worse and who's winning and who's losing. And it's all this stuff. And he says, listen, do everything without complaining or arguing, without grumbling. You know, like that would be very different to see that applied, right? To see that happen in our own lives. But it would also bring very different results to a relationship, to your future, to your work, whatever it is that you do. See, in your notes, we look upward and we speak about God's best. We look upward and we speak about God's best. It's a huge liability to be someone who grumbles and has a bad attitude. God sees it, other people see it, and it takes valuable space in your thoughts and in your time. A very successful college president that was leading at the university I went to in Indiana is now leading a university in South Carolina. His name's Todd Voss. He says that thinking positive about things in life, it won't guarantee that you'll be successful. But thinking negatively will guarantee that you won't. And it's a huge liability to be someone who's always complaining about life and seeing the worst. And really, it's an insult to God who gave us everything. When we become entitled and we're looking at all the things that are wrong and complaining about things, and then we have this God in heaven who generously gave us life that we didn't have anything to do with. It was just a gift. And then he gave us grace that was undeserved through his son Jesus, who he gave up for us. I mean, he gave us everything. And then we complain and we focus on all the negative things in life. And it's a liability. It's a huge liability in our relationships, in our life, and it's not honoring to God. You know, they say that you'll find what you're looking for, and I found this true, right? I mean, you'll find what you're looking for. If you're looking in your, let's just say, friendship or marriage, if you're looking for the worst, you'll see it. If you're looking for the flaws, if you're looking for the problems, you'll find it, because all of us are imperfect. And so if you're feeling like you're in a relationship that's not going well, maybe is it because you're looking for the worst? What if you flip that and you thought about their best, if you looked for God's best? What if you started focusing on the beauty that you could see inside of every scenario, inside of every person, instead of the worst? What if you looked for the best? You kind of get whatever it is that you're mining for. So are you digging for gold, or are you looking for the worst? And you're going to find it. You're going to find it. If you're looking for treasure, you find it. And in people, there is this inherent value created in the image of God. There is beauty, and if you look, you'll see it. It's there. Even in your most difficult relationships, if you focus on all the things that are bad, you're going to just see that. But you'll be blinded to the beauty that's there if you'll look for it, and you'll unearth it. So we look upward. We look to God, and you know there are problems, there are challenges. This is not to overlook or ignore problems or injustice or hardships. That's a different thing. But this is saying that when we're not to complain, when Paul says, listen, don't complain, don't argue. He's setting a new standard for followers of Jesus. He's saying that this is living differently in our culture. And he talks about, with such passion, he talks about what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And he's talking to this early church, this first church planted in all of Europe, this church that he helped start with much hardship to himself. And he's saying, listen, how you live out your faith, do this in a way that's honoring to God and is exemplary to other people. But it's not without the acknowledgement that things are hard sometimes. So you're saying, well, Brandon, I have a lot of things going on in my life. It's easy to say don't complain about it, but I have a lot of difficult things that I'm dealing with. So what we do with those things is that instead of releasing our pressure and our problems to other people and dumping those, like we still need a place to go with that. We just look upward. We just look to God and we say, well, God, so here's what's going on in my life. I mean, read the Psalms. Read how David prayed with such vulnerability. And he expressed his frustration and disappointments and his challenges, his enemies. He's prayed, God, break their teeth. I mean, he was raw and he was real. And that's okay to bring it to God. And certainly in the right relationship context, you should be able to share your challenges with other people. But if you're constantly like just gushing negativity into the lives of others because you're not taking it to God and you're just doing like what you hear some people say, I just speak whatever's on my mind, you're having a negative impact on other people, and it's a liability because they see that in you whether you see it or not. And just speaking whatever is on your mind is not a good idea. It's the verbal equivalent of saying, I just do whatever I feel like doing. Now, if you just do whatever you feel like doing, where will your life be like 6 months from now or 3 years from now? Like if any of us just did whatever we felt like doing at any given moment, we would end up in a very bad place, because doing just whatever you feel like doing does not lead you to a God-honoring place. It leads you to a very, very bad place. And the verbal equivalent of that is, I just say whatever I am thinking. And what you're thinking is not always the right thing, and it's not always honoring to God. And so we have to choose our words carefully and intentionally, as it says in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29. It says, do not let any unwholesome talk. So you know how earlier it says, do not let, with everything, do not complain and argue. So there's this everything statement. And then and here in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29, do not let any. So it's these all-encompassing statements. So we should be consistent. We should have integrity. We should always be the same kind of person, not just on Sunday, but every day of the week. We should consistently live this out. Don't let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful in building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. So we're to bring light and encouragement to others. We're to speak to their best. We're to speak to God's best and raise and value others. I think a marking moment in my life in this area happened when I was in high school. And some friends and I got together. There's a group of us, so we went out and we went bowling. And I'm not a great bowler. Like if I get in triple digits, I'm super happy, right? I mean, it's like, I think the greatest invention with bowling was like, you know, the bumpers that they came up with. I'm like, if I wasn't embarrassed, I would use those suckers every time, because my ball, it just lands in the gutter. And then I see like people who are really good at bowling, and they can like curve the ball and they spin it. I'm so jealous every time I see that. I'm like, that's awesome. So I try it, and the ball just goes in the gutter faster, like twice as fast. It's like, I don't get it. But I always have fun just talking with people and enjoying the time together if I'm bowling. And when I was there with my high school friends, I noticed something that happened in our time together that truly marked me probably for the rest of my life. I noticed that the smack talk, which is fun and just messing with each other, it very quickly degraded down to really cutting on others. And it became something fun to it became something where people were really cutting on others. And then it kind of took one last shift where it went from just cutting on others to really being an unhealthy, almost toxic conversation where people there's nothing positive being said. It was a really negative environment. And I just remember in the group, I remember one of the girls, someone had said something to her, and she just started crying. Oh. I guess someone in here that's sympathetic. That's great. And she just started crying, and then one of the guys left. It was like I don't think he was planning on leaving, but he just had to kind of leave. It was just not an environment that he wanted to be in, and I just remember sitting there just kind of watching this whole thing and taking it in, and like, okay, here's this one of my friends in tears. Here's another one of my friends that doesn't even want to be there. It just was not a great environment, and normally like this was a really fun group to hang out with, and I was like, what's the deal? And I was just processing it as much as I could understand at that time. I was like, I think it's our words, like. No one did this intentionally, but no one was proactively trying to lift others up and build others up. And what happened was all this unwholesome talk started to tear people down, and it became a place that no one wanted to be in. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to try my best to not be in those environments. And when I am in neutral environments, I'm going to try to be someone to lift the room. I'm going to try to encourage others. I'm going to try to lift others up. I'm going to try to speak the best as much as I'm able to. I'm not going to get it right all the time, but I'm going to try to be someone to bring light into the conversation. And certainly try not to be someone who tears others down. And none of us get this right all the time, but man, how powerful would it be if us as the church could be those kind of people that that when we're in the room, like it's a better place because we're there. Not because of us. I mean, we're flawed, sinful people, but because of Jesus' light shining through us, because of his work in us. Like if we're the kind of people that when others were around us, they felt better because of who Jesus is in us, and it was shining through into their lives. They felt better, more encouraged, bigger because of what God was doing in us. I think that would be incredible if we could be that kind of church, those kind of people, and speak to God's best and others. You know, part of this is extremely challenging because, you know, things happen, and when Paul's talking here in Philippians 2 about, you know, don't argue, you know, that way of battling in our world that leads ultimately to wars and all kinds of disappointment and destruction, and not only on a micro level in relationships, but on a macro level in nations and people groups and all kinds of stuff, that tension of arguing and the battling and the conflict, you know, a lot of times it stems out of that me first inward focus, right? It's what I want. It's I want my way. I want my preference. And then we're offended because someone does something we don't like, or they have a different preference that's conflicting with ours. And so it becomes a battle with two sides. And Paul writes here to this church, this early church. He says, listen, do everything without grumbling, everything without arguing. And so how you do that is, you know, when you're in a conversation, when you're in a moment and you find yourself being offended, is you surrender. You take a step back and you say, okay, God, I'm surrendering my right to put me first in this moment, to make it about me, and I'm surrendering that to you, God, and I want what you want in this situation. And there's certainly times where you have to be assertive and you have to speak. There's like injustice or something happening, and you need to stand up and you need to voice what you think, and that's not always going to be accepted, or you need to be a leader in a moment. But there's a lot of times where we're finding ourselves offended, that it leads to arguments or tensions or conflict or split relationships. We're finding ourselves offended where we could simply humble ourselves and choose to overlook the offense. Listen to the wisdom found in Proverbs chapter 19. This verse, maybe you want to write this down. I've committed this to my heart, and so many times it's come up in moments of potential conflict where I was finding myself offended by something, and I was able to let it go. Proverbs 19:11. A person's wisdom yields patience, and it is to one's glory to overlook an offense. It's to one's glory to overlook an offense. So it's to your glory, to your benefit, to your credit, to overlook an offense. Now again, not turning your head the other way when something wrong is happening where you should step in, but this is when someone steps on your toes verbally, or in some way they put themselves first and it offends you because you're like, well, what about me? Me first. You put you first, well, what about me first? And that thing that rises up in us is called pride. And pride is at the root of strife, as the Bible says. It's at the root of conflict. And so by humbling yourself and choosing to overlook the offense, your relationships are better. So we look upward to God and we ask what he wants. We speak to God's best. We choose to overlook offenses. Let's look back to Philippians chapter 2 again in verse 19. Paul is writing this, some say from Rome, where he's imprisoned. And he's writing back to the church in Philippi, and they have some mutual connections, some mutual friendships. They're pioneering God's work here together in Europe, and they're doing these great things for him. And he's writing them this letter, and he says this in verse 19, I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon. Timothy is Paul's protege, his mentee. He's even got a couple letters that are written in our Bible, 1st and 2nd Timothy, that these letters written that we could see to Timothy to help train him up as a godly leader. And he says, I hope to send Timothy to you, and that I also may be cheered when I receive news about you. I have no one else like him who will show genuine concern for your welfare. Verse 21, for everyone looks out for their own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. But you know that Timothy has proved himself because as a son with his father, he has served with me in the work of the gospel. He says, Timothy's the kind of guy who is going to look out genuinely for your welfare. He's going to care about you. You ever meet somebody like that? They genuinely care. Not that they care for their benefit, like it's a win for you, so it's a win for them. It's like, even to the point that they would disadvantage themselves for your advantage. Like, that's incredible when you meet. And he says, I have no one else. Paul is like, I have no one else like Timothy. He genuinely cares. Look at him in his eyes. You can tell he really cares about you. What if we were that kind of people? What if you were that kind of person? What if your friends, right now, if I said that and your friend was in the room, they said, you know what, I do know someone like that, and they thought of you. Wouldn't that be incredible? That could happen. And he says, I don't have anyone else like this, because he says, the reason why is because, verse 21, for everyone looks out for their own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. So the reason why things are the way they are is because everybody's constantly looking out for their own interests. What's in it for me? What do I get out of it? Well, how do I benefit? Even believers, even Christians, he's writing this letter to the church in Philippi. So this is not just broadcast out to everyone. This is specifically addressed to the church. And he says, like everyone looks out for their own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. He's saying Timothy is rare, even in the church, that you'd find someone who's looking out for not their interests, but the interests of Jesus. In your notes, here's the lesson: is we as believers, this is how it could be. We look outward, and we look out for the interests of Jesus. We look outward, meaning, one is because God cares about people, we care intentionally about people. We find ways to serve, to listen, to express value, to pray. I'm so sad this week to hear about Steve, this 39-year-old guy in our church, one of our life group leaders, been with us a long time, to hear about him passing away and leaving his family and just all behind in loss and sorrow and all that. But then so quickly to be encouraged by seeing the church already starting to rally around them. And David and Anita Kirk, David is our life group's ministry leader, already starting to rally together. They're putting some things together to coordinate help with food as she comes back from Georgia and she gets back into town, and how we can help and take care of some expenses and things like that. And we got a funeral coming on Saturday, and there'll be a lot of support, tons of people praying for him. Just really neat to see the church rallying around and caring for someone in their moment of weakness and loss. In fact, we had in our first service this morning, a lady in our church who was a lawyer came up to me and she said, hey, tell them that I will pro bono free. I will help them with her Social Security benefits needs and stuff. Then let me help with that. And so I texted Jen and she's like, oh, I'll need help with that. That's great. And just to see people rallying together, hey, this is what I can do. This is how I can help. And what if we were the kind of church that anytime there was a need, whether it was a large scale thing and a lot of people knew about it, or it was just something you were the only person that knew about it, what if we were the kind of people that we just stepped into that gap and we served? Instead of the way things are, which is everybody kind of looks out for themselves, what if you and I were the kind of people that we stepped forward? When everyone else is stepping back when there's a problem, we stepped into it and we said, hey, I want to help. I want to make things better. I want to lift this situation. I want to bring light into the darkness. That would be incredible. What if you were that kind of person? What would happen in our world if we brought compassion and unleashed it in a powerful way? You know, we get opportunities to do this together, and I think it's so cool when we do. You see in your weekly, this Tuesday, we have a compassion project at Shepherd's Village. Shepherd's Village, we've been there many times, and we've served them. We're going to serve them a pre-Thanksgiving dinner this year, and there's kind of limited space, so I encourage you to step into it. But we're going to go help these single mothers of children that they're kind of in transition, and Shepherd's Village helps transition single parents back to a place of stability where they can kind of take care of themselves and their kids, and it's just a great opportunity for us to step in that gap and that transition gap for many of these families to really help and bring the love of Christ and courage. It's so neat. We get to do things like that. You know, this is actually a big week. There's a lot of neat opportunities. We're going to have our first class. If you've never been to that's happening this week. It's where we gather together at a local hotel, and a lot of our leaders come, and we just, for those who are wanting to get more involved or just learn more, we share a free meal together, and we have childcare and all that. But the thing that I really love about it is not only the chance to share our history and our vision for the future as we're a new church getting started, but to say, hey, here's how you can get involved, and here's how we can be better together. Here's how you can use your gifts to make a difference. Here's all the opportunities. And it's awesome to see people getting connected and learning what options there are to get involved, and it's just such a neat time. But you know, we do care about people individually, so we listen, advise, we coach, we help, we serve. But because God cares about people, we step into those things. But because God cares about his church collectively, we care about God's church as a whole. And so when I asked you guys to pray last week, because we're looking at our first building, and man, we're going to be so excited about that, to have our own place. We're grateful to be here, but we've said for some time that that's our next step, and to have not only the ability to gather on Sundays, but to have a place where we can utilize for ministry 24/7, 7 days a week. And we were hoping to find out this last week, and because of a situation in the owner of the building's personal life, that meeting had to be moved to this coming week. So we're still waiting to hear news, and this will be our next space, and so keep praying. But we care about things like that, not because that our hope is in some building or something, but because that benefits our church as a whole. It allows us to be greater light in our community. It allows us to make a bigger difference in all kinds of things, from student ministry to serving, and all kinds of incredible opportunities are allowed us when we take a step of faith collectively. But we care about that because God cares about that. And so we care. We choose to care as God's church. You ever sense that someone's unavailable? Maybe you call them and they're just not taking your call, or you stop by and they got the sign up that says, "We're out to lunch." Isn't that like a horrible feeling when you need something or you need to talk to someone and they're unavailable? It happens all the time, every day of the week in so many different scenarios, and we find that, oh man, they're unavailable or they're closed. I thought I was going to get there and they're closed. And most people are unavailable to the needs and the opportunities that are all around them. Here's the shift in thinking that makes us different as believers. Is while most of the world's unavailable to help and to care, we open ourselves up and we become available. And we say, as believers in Jesus, we're available. We're here to help. We can't meet every need. We can't do everything, not individually, but we can do something. And so I make myself available for Christ. I look up to the Father and I say, God, help me to look outward this week. When I wake up on Monday morning, help me not to look inward. And that's my default, me. But help me to look outward and say, all right, God, how do you want to use me? Help me to look up and say, Father, what pleases you? Not what pleases me, but God, what pleases you? How can I be used by you to make a difference in this world? One more time, let's look back at Philippians chapter 2, finally in verse 25. Paul's writing, and he says, "But I think it's necessary to send back to you Epaphroditus, my brother, co-worker, fellow soldier, who is also your messenger, whom you sent to take care of my needs. For he longs for all of you and is distressed because you heard he was ill. Indeed, he was ill and almost died. But God had mercy on him, and not on him only, but also on me, to spare me sorrow upon sorrow. Therefore, I am all the more eager to send him, so that when you see him again, you may be glad and I may have less anxiety." Now listen to this, verse 29. "So then, welcome him. Welcome him in the Lord with great joy, and honor people like him, because he almost died for the work of Christ. He risked his life to make up for the help you yourselves could not give." Honor people like him. Honor Epaphroditus. You know, this last week was Veterans Day, and we had a day of honoring those who served. And I love when we have days like that. In fact, I would love to do something here. If you're currently active duty in any branch of the military, or you have been in the past and you're a vet, would you please just stand for a moment and let us recognize you? Please stand. Come on, please stand up. We'd love to honor you. If there's anyone here that's active or current duty, okay, that's awesome. That's awesome. And we had several in the other service too, and thank you so much. And you know, it's great to honor someone, because there's so many things that we've been given that we take for granted. You know, our freedom was bought through the sacrifice of others. And we almost become entitled to it when we become used to it. It's kind of like oxygen. We just assume that there'll be a next breath. But every breath is a gift from God, and it's a gift from God that he gave to us freely. And so when we start to take things for granted and we forget the sacrifice, honor does something in us. It brings us back to the place where we're grateful, where there's gratitude. So Paul says to honor Epaphroditus, this guy who has served faithfully. In fact, he almost died for the gospel to advance the message of Jesus. And he says, honor people like that, because that is something that's valuable in this world. People who serve and give. Let me give you an example. How many of you in this room are currently serving in God's church in some way? Maybe you came early to the first service to watch kids and to care for kids and love on them so people could be in that service. Or maybe you helped with the setup this morning, or you help in the band or the tech or the student ministry or somebody there. How many of you in the past year or currently just served? Just raise your hand up. I'd love just to see it. Look at that. All kinds of hands all around the room. That's awesome. You know, we're to honor. The Bible says honor people like that who serve, because that is a valuable thing that they are doing. That's a God-honoring, God-pleasing thing. That's a vision for what you and I should live like, what could be. It's people who are giving themselves away for the benefit of others. And that's a lesson in your notes, is we honor those who honor the Lord. We honor them. We honor them with words, with notes, encouragement. However we can, we find ways to lift them up and honor them. And Paul, in this he talks about in verse 25, he talks about Epaphroditus, this guy that he wants them to honor. He says, he's my brother, my coworker, and my fellow soldier. He's my fellow soldier. There was a lot of Roman soldiers who had really essentially retired to that area of Philippi and surrounding. They'd been given fields, and that was a gift to them, and they had farmed that area and lived in that area. And so a lot of the people that Paul was writing to in this church would have known, maybe had relatives who were former military people, and that was a language they understood. And he says, as a fellow soldier, he's a soldier, and there's a lot of that terminology used in Scripture to speak of a follower of Jesus as a soldier in God's army, advancing to take territory for God's kingdom into the spiritual darkness. We move, we advance, and we expand God's work. And so he says he's a fellow soldier, and they understood that language. He says, honor him. It's in a very similar way that we would honor those who give of their lives for our freedom. We're supposed to honor also those who give of their lives for our spiritual freedom and for what Jesus has done and how they're sharing that. So we honor. We honor. I think you could summarize this entire chapter this way. It's in your notes. Most people live inward and forward. We live outward and we live upward. How it practically works out is we start to change the way we think and what we notice. This last summer, I sat around a beautiful campfire up in Michigan, and I was there with my dad and my brother. All the cousins were playing. My 6-year-old daughter and her cousin came running over to me, and they handed me a paper. They had spent a few minutes like coloring, hey, we love you, Dad, or Uncle Brandon, and we made some pictures on it. And I could tell it was special to them. It was special to me, but I could tell it wasn't something they'd spent a ton of time on. And as a parent, you have tons of these moments where, I have 4 kids, and so, I can't tell you how many times someone's handed me something that says, hey, Dad, I love you. And the first year is awesome because every time it happens, you're like, that's amazing, and you save it. And then you realize you have all this stuff from their school or from church. You have 1,000 things, and you're like, I can't save all this. This is not sustainable. So you learn over time, you're like, what stuff is really meaningful to save, and what stuff you're like, oh, that's cute, and then you throw it away. It's like, just being real with you, that's what you do. And you're like, that's so calloused. And that's the problem, is it can become a little too callous because they give you their stuff and you're like, oh, that's awesome. You wait till they go to bed, you're like, throw it in the trash. But then you bury it, you kind of put something over it because you don't want them to see it. It'd be weird if they wake up in the morning and like, Dad, threw my thing away. And you just might take the trash out before you need to because, you don't want to, but you can't. You can't save 10,000 things over the course of their, 18 years in your household. So you learn what's meaningful and what's not, right? You get it? You got it? Okay, good. So I'm sitting around this fire, they bring up these cool things. I'm like, oh, that's so sweet, thank you guys. It's awesome. I was genuinely thankful. I thought it was really cool, but I've seen a million of these things with, a little stick figure, and I love you, Dad. Like, oh, it's so great. I'm not saving this one, but that's awesome. They run off to play. I'm sitting there with my dad and my brother. I'm not thinking twice about it. I'm like, oh, that's cool. I garble them up. I throw them in the fire. I did. And I didn't think twice about it. I was going to throw them away anyway, so I threw it in the fire, and they found out about it. And they come up to me the next day and they're like, so, do you remember those pictures that we made for you? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, did you burn them? I'm not going to lie to my daughter and my niece about, is there another option? Can I say, yeah, they're burned in my memory forever. It's like, is there some way to get out of this? I don't think there is. It's like, yeah, I totally did. I confess. I am so sorry. I'm so sorry I did that. I'm begging for forgiveness from these children, and they're so disappointed. It's amazing how the little things, and I know it's like, I'm a horrible parent. I'm a horrible human being. I know that's what you're thinking right now. There's things when, there's moments when we neglect those moments, those little things in our life that speak with such great volume to those around us. When you walk right past someone and you don't stop and notice, because you're busy, me, I got to do this. You're thinking forward, here's what I got to do next. And you don't pause and stop. How are you doing today? Now, you can't just constantly sit around. And you do have to hit the gas, and you have to see some results in your life, and you have an occupation, and you have to provide and all that. But how many times have you neglected something small, like, someone who was in need, or someone who needed some attention or some time, or you could have prayed for someone, or you could have just wrote out a little note or sent a message to someone. But it was so much about me that day, and forward, I got to go forward, that you actually went backward. backward relationally, backward toward the life you've always wanted to live, backward towards getting to joy because you were so wrapped up in this endless wheel of going forward, me. But when you and I step back and we look outward and we look upward and we say, Father, how can I live for you today? How can I be about your work? And we look out and we see others who God has created, who God loves, and he wants to use us to bring light into their life. And we step into those opportunities. We step into those moments to care, to give attention, to bring value, to lift others, to use our words and our actions to make a difference. Man, that's when we really move forward. When we move forward to how life could be, we move forward to where God wants to take us, we move forward to what God wants to do in us. That's how you find joy. You think outward, you look upward. I hope this week that you and I will shift how we think about life, and we'll shift into a greater life, a life that looks upward and a life that looks outward. Right on?
Thanks for joining us at Church Experience Online. Please don't forget to check out the website if you'd like to get more connected, learn more, get your questions answered, or support this movement financially. You're now going to hear a Church Experience Worship original song, and we hope this gives you an opportunity to worship and reflect on what you learned today.
You have the power of all, but you washed our feet. Though you were right to rule, became servant king, became servant king. In love you came here, laying down your glory. You were fighting for me, you were drawing us near, invited to your kingdom, living in your freedom. You came not to be served, but to lay down your life, our King of infinite worth, becoming finite. You lowered yourself to raise us to life. Oh, great servant King, be lifted high. You're calling us to be your hands and feet, serving the lost and least. Great servant King, oh great servant King. In love you came here, laying down your glory. You were fighting for me, you were drawing us near, invited to your kingdom, living in your freedom. You came not to be served, but to lay down your life, our King of infinite worth, becoming finite. You lowered yourself to raise us to life. Oh, great servant King, be lifted high. In love you came here, laying down your glory. You were fighting for me, you were drawing us near, invited to your kingdom, living in your freedom. In love you came here,